The sky was the color of a fresh bruise, a sickly purple-black swelling over the New Mexico desert. It promised violence, but offered no relief. For 3 months, not a single drop of rain had blessed the high chaparral. The wind, when it came, was a hot, dry breath that stole the moisture from a man's lips and carried the topsoil clear into Arizona territory. The land was dying, and the cattle were dying with it. Asa McKinnon felt the grit between his teeth as he rode. His horse, a tough-hided bay named Judas, plodded with its head low. Exhausted from the 10-mile trek, Asa was not a man given to fancy. His clothes were sun-bleached denim and leather, worn thin at the knees and elbows. His face was a map of dry gullies, carved by 40 years of sun and a past he never spoke of. The war had left scars on his back, and betrayal had left deeper ones on his soul. He ranched alone, a dozen miles from Socorro, and that was how he liked it. But even a solitary man needed supplies, and even a failing town needed a doctor. He rode into Socorro as the last of the sun's light bled away, leaving the world in shades of ash. The town was a hopeful scar on the landscape. 2 rows of false-fronted buildings facing each other across a river of dust. Tonight, the livery stable was lit bright, lamps hanging from the rafters and spilling yellow light onto the hard-baked street. Men were gathered, their voices a low rumble. This was the auction. Dr. Miller, a good man who'd set more broken bones and delivered more babies than anyone could count, was out of quinine, out of laudanum, out of clean bandages. The railroad had promised a shipment, but the railroad always promised. So the town did what it always did. It passed the hat, or, in this case, auctioned its assets. Asa swung down from Judas, his joints cracking in protest. He slapped the dust from his chaps, a futile gesture. He was not here to buy. He was here to give. He'd already pledged 2 yearlings from his meager herd, a donation that hurt him more than he'd admit. He tied Judas to the rail, giving the horse a final pat on the neck. "Don't drink the water if it ain't clean," he muttered. He entered the livery. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale whiskey, manure, and the nervous sweat of livestock. A makeshift auction block. Nothing more than 3 planks laid across 2 barrels. Stood at the far end. Mayor Hemlock, a man whose belly strained his waistcoat, was presiding. "And now, gentlemen," Hemlock boomed, his voice slick with false enthusiasm, "we have a fine specimen, a genuine Hereford bull, donated by our own Mr. Cartwright." Asa found a spot against the back wall, folding his arms. He watched the bidding. It was sluggish. Men inspected their boots, their wallets thin, their spirits drier than the land. The bull went for $22, barely half its worth. Asa's jaw tightened. He watched his own yearlings go for a pittance, a quiet insult to the work it took to keep them alive. He was about to leave. He'd done his part. The air was too close, the smell of desperation too strong. He turned his shoulder toward the door just as Mayor Hemlock raised his hands for silence. "And now, gentlemen," the mayor said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush that carried to every corner. "We have a very special lot, a donation of a different kind. You might say, all proceeds, every last cent, to Dr. Miller's fund for medical supplies." A nervous titter ran through the crowd. Men nudged each other. Asa paused, his hand on the rough-hewn doorframe. "Brought in just this morning," Hemlock continued, wiping a sheen of sweat from his upper lip, though the evening was cooling. "A charity case, straight from the east. Let us welcome her." 2 men, deputies by their cheap tin stars, walked onto the stage. Between them was a woman, or perhaps just a girl. It was hard to tell. She was wrapped in a dress that might once have been fine, a dark blue silk, but it was torn at the shoulder and smeared with mud at the hem. Her hair, the color of corn silk, was matted and hung in limp strands over her face. She did not walk. She was pushed. When she stumbled onto the platform, one of the deputies grabbed her arm and righted her with a jerk. "This," the mayor announced, stepping aside as if presenting a prized mare, "is Lorena." The girl stood frozen, Her head was bowed, her hands bound loosely in front of her with a bit of twine, a mockery of capture. Asa could see her trembling from across the livery. It was not a shiver from the cold. It was the deep, rattling tremor of abject terror. "What's the bid, gentlemen?" Hemlock grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "A companion for the long winter nights? A helper for the house? She's versatile." A roar of crude laughter erupted. A man near the front, a drifter Asa recognized, yelled out, $1 for the night! Ha! Shouted another. "I'll give you $2. Mayor, if she can cook." $5, someone else bellowed. "If she's clean." The mayor raised his hands. Now. This is for charity. This is for her passage. A kind of indenture. A contract to be held by the winning bidder for a period of 1 year. Asa felt something cold and hard settle in his gut. This was not charity. This was a slave block, dressed up in civic duty. He looked at the girl. She had raised her head. Just a fraction. He could not see her eyes. Only the curtain of pale hair, but he could see the shiver that ran down her spine. A vibration so violent it seemed her bones might shake apart. He had seen that kind of trembling before, in a colt with a broken leg, in a soldier on the battlefield, his guts held in by his own hands. It was the shaking of a creature that knew the end had come. $10, yelled the first drifter, emboldened. 15. Come now, gentlemen, the mayor chided. This is for the good doctor. Surely this fine young woman is worth more than $15. He stepped toward her and, with one fat finger, hooked it under her chin and lifted her face to the light. The gasp in the room was sharp. Her face was a ruin. A dark, ugly bruise covered her left cheek and swelled her eye half shut. Her lip was split, caked with dried blood, but it was her other eye, the one that was open, that stopped Asa's breath. It was wide, blue as a mountain lake, and utterly, terrifyingly vacant. She was not there. She had gone somewhere deep inside, a place they could not reach, and still, she trembled. The laughter died. This was not the playful vice the men had expected. This was ugly. This was damaged goods. The mayor, sensing the mood shift, dropped his hand. A bit aware, perhaps, but nothing a good home won't fix. Do I hear 20? Silence. The men shuffled. This was not a woman. This was trouble. Sold. Then to Mr. $50. The voice cut through the livery, flat and cold as a tombstone. It was Asa's. Every head in the room turned. Asa had not moved from the back wall. He stood like a statue, his arms still crossed, his face unreadable in the shadows. Mayor Hemlock blinked. "Mr. McKinnon, did I hear you say $50? "You heard me," Asa said. The words came out coated in dust. A low murmur started. $50 was a fortune. It was more than the bull and the yearlings combined. The drifter, who had bid $10, spat on the floor. "What's the matter? McKinnon, your hand getting tired at night?" Asa's eyes, gray as river stones, slid to the man. He said nothing. The drifter took an involuntary step back, as if Asa had struck him. $50, Hemlock repeated, his poise returning. "A fine, generous bid from one of our most steadfast ranchers." "Do I hear 55? Do I hear 51? The livery was silent. No one would bid against Asa McKinnon. Not when he used that voice. "Going once," Hemlock said, his voice speeding up. "Going twice. Sold! To Mr. Asa McKinnon for $50. Asa pushed off the wall. He did not look at the crowd. He walked the length of the livery, his boot heels striking the hard-packed earth with a steady, heavy rhythm. He pulled a small leather pouch from his belt, untied the thong, and counted out the coins into the mayor's sweaty, waiting palm. It was almost every cent he had. "A pleasure. Mr. McKinnon," the mayor beamed. "A true Christian gesture." Asa ignored him. He looked at the deputies. "Cut her loose." One of the men fumbled with a pocket knife and sawed through the twine. The girl's hands fell to her sides. She did not move. She just kept staring at that spot on the floor. "Come on," Asa said. It was not a kind word. It was just a command. He turned and walked toward the door. He did not look back to see if she was following. He heard the whisper of her torn dress on the dirt floor, the light, hesitant scuff of her shoes. He pushed the door open and stepped out into the night. Judas nickered softly. The wind had picked up, and it was cold. He untied the reins and was about to mount when he heard the sound behind him. A wet, sharp sound. He looked down. She had spat on his boots. A thick glob of saliva and blood was sliding down the scarred leather. He looked up at her. The vacancy was gone from her eyes. In its place was a fire, a hatred so pure and white-hot it was almost beautiful. "Go to hell," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "I've been," Asa said, his voice rough. "It's hotter than this. You think you own me now?" she hissed, her good hand clenching into a fist. "You think that $50 makes me your property. I'm not his, and I'm not yours. I'm not anybody's." "I don't own you," Asa said, his voice low. He was tired. He was tired clear through to the bone. "I paid to stop the noise. That's all." "Liar!" She spat the word. "You're just like him. Just like all of them. You think you can buy a body and do what you want with it. Well, I'll kill you first. I swear it. I'll kill you in your sleep." Asa looked at her for a long moment. He saw the bruise, the split lip, the defiant terror. He saw a creature caught in a trap, chewing its own leg off to get free. "My ranch is 12 miles north of here," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "You can stay in the guest cot. There's a bolt on the inside of the door. You can stay until you figure out your life. You can leave tomorrow. You can leave tonight. I don't care." He swung his leg over Judas, settling into the worn saddle. He looked down at her. She was so small. The wind whipped her pale hair across her face, stinging her eyes. "Are you coming or not?" She stared at him, her chest heaving. She was weighing her options. A night in the desert, with the coyotes and the cold, or a night with the man who had bought her. She chose the man. With a sound of disgust, she grabbed the back of his saddle. Asa nudged Judas with his heels, and the horse began the slow walk out of town. They rode in silence, two shadows moving through a landscape that had already given up the ghost. The ride was an agony of silence. The wind was the only voice, screaming over the mesas, promising a dust storm that would strip the land bare. Lorena stumbled twice, her thin shoes catching on rocks, but she never made a sound. She just picked herself up and kept her grip on the saddle. Asa never looked back. His ranch was not much. A small, 2-room adobe house, a sagging porch, a corral, and a barn that leaned to the east. It was a hard place, built for survival, not comfort. He dismounted and led Judas to the water trough. He worked the pump handle, the squeal of the metal a painful cry in the night. The horse drank greedily. Lorena stood by the porch, hugging herself, her body rigid. "The house," Asa said, nodding toward the door. "Like I said, cots to the left. There's a water bucket and a basin. I sleep on the porch." She didn't move. "Go on," he said, his voice rough with impatience. "I'm not going to tell you again." She flinched, as if expecting a blow. Slowly, she climbed the 2 steps and disappeared into the darkness of the house. Asa heard the scrape of the cot, and then, distinctly, the sound of the heavy iron bolt sliding home. He sighed, a long, weary breath that turned to smoke in the cold air. He unsaddled Judas, rubbing the horse down with a dry sack, his movements economical and practiced. He put the horse in the corral with a measure of feed he could not spare. He took his own bedroll from his saddlebags and spread it on the porch, near the door. The wood was hard beneath him, but he was used to it. He lay on his back, his hands laced behind his head, and stared up at the sky. The clouds had thickened, blotting out the stars, but it was a false promise. It was all wind, no water. He wondered, not for the first time. If he was a fool, what in God's name had he been thinking? He had thrown away money he needed for grain, all for a slip of a girl who looked at him like he was something she'd scraped off her boot, a girl who was, right now, probably holding a knife on the other side of that door. He muttered a prayer, but it was not a prayer for salvation. It was a prayer for rain, a prayer for the land, for the cattle, for anything but the mess he had just invited into his home. "Lord," he whispered to the dark, roiling sky, "you've got a strange sense of humor." There was no answer but the howl of the wind. Inside the small room, Lorena did not sit on the cot. She was pressed into the corner, as far from the door as she could get. Her legs were drawn up, her arms wrapped around them. In her right hand, she gripped a small, sharp object. It was a knife, a small paring knife she had found on the dry sink next to the basin. Her knuckles were white. She listened. She heard his movements outside, the creak of the pump, the sounds of the horse being tended, the thump of his bedroll on the porch, and now, silence. She did not believe him. Men did not pay $50 for nothing. Men did not offer shelter. They offered a cage and called it protection. He was waiting. He was waiting for her to sleep. He was waiting for her to lower the knife. She would not. She would stay awake all night. She would wait for the sun, and then she would run. But the day had been too long. The auction, the ride, the terror. Her body was a leaden weight. Her eyelids burned. She drifted, her grip on the knife loosening, and in that half-sleep, the dreams came. They were not soft dreams. They were sharp, fragmented images. A man's face, bearded and smelling of whiskey. Her father, his voice thick with rage. The sound of a gavel, like a hammer blow. Sold. The cold, slick mud of a riverbank. A bundle in her arms. A tiny, perfect, silent face. The awful, hollow emptiness as they took the baby away. A baby born still and blue, unworthy. The smell of smoke. The orange glow of fire licking at the curtains of a fancy room in a house she did not know. A man's hand on her arm. Too tight. Run! She woke with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs. The knife was still in her hand. She was in the dark. She heard the wind, and beneath it, the steady, slow breathing of the man on the porch. He was asleep. She did not lower the knife. She watched the sliver of gray light under the door, praying for a dawn that seemed a lifetime away. Dawn came not as light, but as a lessening of the dark. The bruised purple of the sky faded to a flat, exhausted gray. On the porch, Asa McKinnon was already awake. He had not truly slept. He had listened to the wind, and he had listened to the silence from the other side of the door. He moved with the economy of a man who lives alone and has no time to waste. He did not wash. Water was for coffee and for the horse. He built a small fire in the pit near the porch, using precious mesquite twigs, and set the blackened coffee pot over the flames. While it heated, he went inside the main room. He did not glance at her bolted door. He went to the bin, scooped cornmeal and a pinch of salt into a bowl, and worked in a knob of lard with his fingers. He added water, stirred the thick batter, and poured it into a heavy cast-iron skillet, which he propped near the fire. The smell of coffee, sharp and smoky, began to fill the air, followed by the nutty aroma of baking cornbread. He heard a sound, a faint scrape. The iron bolt on her door slid back. The sound was deafening in the morning quiet. Lorena emerged like an animal from a burrow. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale and puffy where it was not bruised. The paring knife was still in her hand, but it was pointed at the floor. She looked at him, then at the fire, then at the rifle he kept leaning against the doorframe. She was assessing threats. Asa did not look at her. He stared into the fire. He motioned with his chin toward the pot. "Coffee's hot," he said. She did not move. Her stomach was cramped with hunger so deep it felt like a wound, but she would not take his food. Taking it meant she owed him. "I don't want it," she whispered, her voice rough. Asa picked up the skillet, the cornbread a perfect golden brown disk. He slid it onto a tin plate and broke off a piece for himself. He set the plate on the edge of the porch. "Suit yourself," he said. He took his coffee black. He drank it standing, looking out at the corral, at the dead land. He did not offer her a cup. He treated her as he would a skittish animal, with careful, respectful distance. He made the food. He made the coffee. If she chose to starve, it was her choice. Lorena watched him. He was not looking at her. He was not smiling. He was not threatening. He was simply existing. His indifference was more confusing than kindness would have been. Her eyes fell on the garden plot. It was a disaster. A few withered squash vines, their leaves coated in gray dust, a row of skeletal corn stalks rattling in the wind. She saw a hoe leaning against the adobe wall. She had to earn her keep. She could not be indebted. If she ate his food, she had to work. It was the only way to keep the transaction clean. She walked past him, her bare feet silent on the cold, packed earth. She did not take the cornbread. She picked up the hoe. It was heavy, the wooden handle smooth and worn. She walked to the garden plot and swung it. The blade hit the ground with a dull thud. The earth was like iron. She swung again, putting all her non-existent strength into it. A few dry clods broke loose. She was trying to break up the soil, to clear the dead vines. She was trying to prove she was not just a mouth to feed, not just a body he had purchased. Asa watched her from the corner of his eye. He said nothing. He finished his coffee. He went to the barn to measure out the last of his grain for Judas. Lorena worked for maybe 10 minutes. The sun, just clearing the eastern mesa, was not yet hot, but it was relentless. Her breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. The hunger, held at bay by pride, returned with a vengeance. A blackness started to creep in at the edges of her vision. The garden plot seemed to tilt. She tried to take another swing, but her arms would not obey. The world dissolved into a spinning, dark vortex. The last sound she heard was the clatter of the hoe as it fell from her lifeless hands. Asa was out of the barn before she even hit the ground. He had seen it coming. He had seen the way she was swaying. He moved with a speed that belied his stiff-legged walk. He reached her in a half-dozen long strides. She was a heap of torn silk and pale hair, dusted with gray dirt. He cursed, a low, bitter sound. He knelt and slid one arm under her back, the other under her knees. She weighed nothing. She was a bird, a handful of hollow bones. He lifted her. The movement, the feeling of his arms around her, broke her out of the faint. Her eyes fluttered open. She was being held. A man was holding her. A thin, reedy scream escaped her lips. She began to fight, her fists drumming weakly against his chest. "Put me down! Don't you touch me! Let me go!" Her struggles were pathetic. It was like being struck by moths. "Stop it!" he growled, and the command in his voice shut her up more effectively than a slap would have. "You're lighter than a sack of feed. You're no good to me, dead." He carried her into the house, into her room. He did not put her on the cot. He dropped her onto it. The shuck mattress crackled beneath her. She scrambled to the far wall, pressing herself into the corner, pulling her knees to her chest. She was trapped. He had her inside. Now it will begin. But Asa just stood in the doorway, his large frame blocking the light. He looked at her, his face grim. And then, the shame came. It was worse than the hunger, worse than the fear. She had collapsed. She had failed at the simplest task. She was weak. She was useless. The tears came. They were not the loud, pleading sobs of a woman seeking comfort. They were the silent, agonizing tears of utter humiliation. Her body shook, her head bowed, her matted hair hiding her face. She cried because she was ashamed. Asa watched her for a long, uncomfortable moment. His hands felt huge and stupid. He wanted to tell her to stop, but he knew it was pointless. He wanted to pat her shoulder, but he knew, instinctively, that his touch would be a violation. It was the one thing he could not offer. He turned away. He went to the main room, to the pot of stew that still hung over the cold hearth from the night before. It was venison and beans, thick and dark. He ladled a helping into a wooden bowl. He broke off a piece of the cornbread and put it on the side. He came back to her doorway. She was still weeping, her thin shoulders hitching. He walked in, set the bowl and the bread on the small stool beside the cot. He did not look at her. He walked out. He pulled the door mostly shut, leaving it open a crack. "Eat it," he said through the door. "Or don't. But I'm not carrying you again." He went back to the porch and began the long, tedious job of mending a broken harness. For a full day, she did not emerge. When Asa checked that evening, the bowl was untouched. Cold. He said nothing. He took it, emptied it for the chickens, and refilled it with fresh stew. He left it in the same spot, along with a dipper of water. The next morning, the bowl was empty. He left more bread and a small piece of cheese. When he returned at midday from checking his fence lines, the food was gone. On the third day, she came out. The bruise on her face had faded to a sickly yellow-green. Her hair was wet. She had used the water in the basin. She had found a length of twine and tied her hair back, revealing the sharp, aristocratic bones of her face. She looked less like a victim and more like a hawk. She found the bucket and took it to the well. He watched her struggle with the rope, her thin arms trembling with the effort of pulling the heavy, waterlogged bucket up. She did not ask for help. It took her 3 attempts, but she got it. She began to work. She did not speak to him. She did not thank him. She simply began to contribute. She fed the chickens. She found a needle and thread in a box and began mending her torn dress, her stitches small and precise. She swept the hard-packed dirt floor of the house. Asa let her. He gave her no orders. He offered no praise. They moved around each other in a silent, careful dance. The days passed, turning into a week. The land was not idle. It was a merciless, active thing. One afternoon, Lorena went to the chicken coop to gather eggs. She reached into the nesting box and her hand brushed against something that was not feathers. It was dry and scaled. She looked down. A 5-foot diamondback rattler was coiled where the hen should have been. She did not scream. She gasped, a choked, sharp intake of air, and fell backward, scrambling out of the coop. Asa was sharpening an axe blade. He heard the commotion, saw her face, and grabbed the hoe. He entered the coop. There was a flurry of motion, the sound of the snake's angry rattle, and then the dull, wet thwack of the hoe blade biting into flesh. He came out, the snake's bloody, headless body dangling from the end of the hoe. He flung it far out into the chaparral. "Watch where you put your hands," he said, his voice level. He went back to his axe. Lorena was shaking. Her face was as white as bone, but she took a breath, walked back into the coop, and gathered the 3 eggs. The nights were worse. The wild dogs, coyotes, or perhaps the gaunt desert wolves, were growing bolder. Their howling was not a distant song. It was a close, unnerving chorus of yips and screams that sounded like children being murdered. Lorena sat on her cot, the knife in her hand again. She could hear them circling the house, their claws scraping on the rocks. Asa sat on the porch, his rifle across his lap. He did not sleep. He just sat, a dark sentinel, watching the shadows beyond the dim yellow square of light from her window. "They're just hungry," he said through the wall, his voice low. "They won't try the door." His voice calmed her more than the howling scared her. She eventually slept, the knife slipping from her fingers. Then the dust came. It began not as wind, but as a change in the light. The sky turned a dark, sickening red. The sun was a dull copper coin, visible but giving no warmth. A low moan began in the distance, a sound that grew into a deafening, abrasive shriek. "Inside!" Asa yelled, running from the barn. "Bring the water bucket!" Lorena grabbed the bucket and scrambled into the house. Asa followed, pushing the heavy door shut. It was immediately plunged into a strange, dark twilight. "The window," he ordered. He had cut a heavy piece of canvas for this. Together, they wrestled it over the inside of the small window, blocking the glass. Asa nailed it into the adobe wall. But it was not enough. The wind hit the house like a physical blow. The small adobe structure shuddered, and the dust began to come in. It seeped through the crack under the door, a fine, gray powder. It came through the nail holes in the canvas. It fell from the ceiling, dislodged from the vigas above. For a full day and a night, they were trapped in that one room. The air grew thick, gritty. Every breath was an effort. They covered their noses and mouths with rags dipped in the precious water. They did not speak. There was nothing to say. They were 2 people in a tomb, buried alive by the sky. Asa sat on a stool, his back to the wall. Lorena sat on her cot. They just endured. The howling of the wind was so loud it was a physical pressure, a solid wall of noise that vibrated in their bones. The storm finally broke on the second evening. The wind died down, not gradually, but as if a switch had been thrown. The silence was as stunning as the noise had been. Asa pulled the canvas from the window. The world outside was unrecognizable. The land was scoured clean, the garden plot buried under a foot of fine, gray silt. But the air was cold, and the sky was black. A flash of white light lit the room, stark and brilliant, followed a second later by a crack of thunder so loud it shook the very foundations of the house. It was not gentle rain. It was a deluge. "The cistern!" Asa yelled, grabbing the bucket and running outside. He needed to catch every drop. The rain came down in solid, icy sheets. Thunder rolled across the desert, one peal overlapping the next. Asa worked, diverting the water that poured from the roof into the underground cistern. He was soaked to the skin in seconds, the cold water a shock after the dry heat. When the bucket was full and the cistern was catching the overflow, he went back inside. He stopped in the doorway. Lorena was not on the cot. She was in the far corner, the same corner she had hidden in the first night. She was curled into a tight ball. Her hands pressed so hard over her ears her knuckles were white. Her eyes were squeezed shut. She was rocking, back and forth, her body rigid with a terror that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Asa stood, dripping onto the floor. This was not fear. This was something else. "Lorena," he said. She did not hear him. He walked closer, his boots heavy with mud. He knelt on his heels, a few feet away from her. He did not touch her. "It's just thunder," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "It'll pass." A low, animal sound came from her throat. "No," she whispered, the word torn from her. "No, no, no!" Another crash of thunder shook the house. She flinched, her whole body jerking. "He liked the noise," she whispered, her voice so small he had to lean in to hear it. He always did it during the storms." Asa waited. The rain lashed the window. "My father," her voice was dead, detached. "He drank when the sky got dark, and he would come to my room. He said the thunder was good, said it covered the sound of me, covered with the sound of the beating." Asa closed his eyes. The ugliness of it settled in his gut, cold and heavy. He looked at this shaking, terrified woman, and the last of his irritation, his regret over the $50, vanished. He did not know how to comfort her. The words did not exist in his vocabulary. So he offered the only thing he had. He offered his own brokenness. "I had a wife," he said, his voice flat, staring at the fire he had just built in the hearth. "Her name was Sarah, and a daughter, Alice." Lorena stopped rocking. She did not look at him, but she was listening. "She was 3 years old," Asa continued, his voice a low rumble beneath the storm. "Had yellow hair, like yours, but curly." He picked up a stick and poked at the fire, the flames reflecting in his gray eyes. "It was 6 years ago. Fever came through, typhoid. The doc said I was out on the North Range, mending fences. It's been 2 days. When I came back," he swallowed. "When I came back, the house was quiet, too quiet. Dr. Miller was here. He'd done all he could. They were both gone, laid out on the bed. He'd closed their eyes for me." He stared into the flames. "I buried them myself, under the cottonwood out back. My soul's grown quiet ever since. Sometimes I wonder if it's still in there at all." He said it to the fire, not to her. He had not spoken those words aloud to any living being. The storm raged outside. Inside, there was a new kind of silence. Later, the storm had passed, leaving the air cold and smelling of wet earth and ozone. The fire in the hearth was the only light, casting huge, dancing shadows on the adobe walls. They sat near it, Asa on his stool, Lorena on the floor, wrapped in a quilt. They were drinking hot, black coffee. They were both exhausted, emotionally scoured. The silence was different now. It was not hostile. It was shared. Lorena looked at Asa's hand, resting on his knee. It was a large hand, the knuckles scarred, the nails blunt, calluses as thick as leather. She had seen that hand kill a snake, lift her as if she were nothing, and gently poke a fire, slowly, as if in a trance. She reached out. Her fingers were thin, pale in the firelight. She did not grab his hand. She just lightly brushed her fingertips across the back of it. Asa flinched as if he had been struck by a hot coal. He snatched his hand back, his whole body going rigid. He clenched it into a fist, his knuckles white. He was not angry. He was terrified. It was the first gentle touch he had felt in 6 years, the first sign of warmth, of connection, of life. And it scared him more than the drought, more than the wolves. He was scared. Not of her, but of wanting, of feeling that dead quiet thing inside him stir. Lorena saw him pull away. She saw the fist, her face, which had been soft and open, hardened. The shame returned, cold and familiar. Of course, she was the bruised goods, the whore from the auction. What was she thinking? Touching him. She pulled her hand back and wrapped her arms around herself, the quilt a flimsy armor. Her voice, when she spoke, was a whisper, but it was rough, sharp, with a new, bitter edge. "Why'd you pay?" Asa looked at her, confused by the sudden shift. She met his gaze, and her eyes were filled with the auction block, with her father's fists, with a lifetime of being used. "Just to do it?" she asked. Was all this just for show? The cot, the stew, the shared stories? Was this just a longer, crueler game to get to the same end? Asa stared at her. He saw what she was asking. He saw what she believed him to be. He opened his mouth to deny it, to say no. But the truth was, he did not know why he had paid. He did not know what he wanted. He saw her, bruised and beautiful and broken, and he felt something, and that something was a betrayal of his wife, a betrayal of his quiet grief. He had no answer for her. He stood up, the stool scraping loudly on the floor. He took his bedroll from the corner. He did not look at her. He walked out of the room, onto the cold, damp porch. Lorena watched him go. His silence was the answer she had expected. The tension in the small house was back, but it was no longer the simple fear of a captive. It was a thick, simmering, impossible thing. It was the tension of two damaged souls who had seen too much, and a new, unspoken desire that felt, to both of them, like the most dangerous storm of all. The silence that followed the storm was heavier than the one that had come before. It was a silence no longer built on fear, but on the new, trembling awareness of each other. Asa's unspoken answer to her question, "Why'd you pay?" "Just to do it," hung in the air, a sour smoke. He had not said yes, but he had not said no. He had simply walked away. Lorena took his silence as a confirmation. She retreated back into herself, but this time it was different. She was not the terrified, frozen creature from the auction. She was a woman who had been offered a sliver of warmth and then had it snatched away. A cold, practical anger settled over her. She would work. She would not be weak again. She would earn $50, and then she would leave. She worked the garden with a fury, her hands blistering, then bleeding, then callousing. She found a strange, grim satisfaction in the pain. She was turning the soil the dust storm had buried, finding the damp earth the rain had left beneath. She was, in a small way, bringing something back from the dead. Asa watched her. He said nothing, but he left a pair of his old leather work gloves on the porch rail. She stared at them for a full day before she slipped them on. They were stiff and huge, but they protected her hands. They spoke only of necessities. The stew is hot. The well bucket has a loose rivet. We're low on flour. Asa worked his own fences, his movements rigid, his face a mask of stone. He was furious with himself, furious for pulling his hand away, furious for the fear she had woken in him, and furious for the silence that now felt like a lie. He had not paid to use her. He had paid. He still did not know why. He only knew that watching her move, watching the determined set of her jaw as she battled the hard earth, caused an ache in his chest that felt dangerously like life. This new, fragile peace was shattered 3 days later. A rider approached, not from the direction of town, but from the east, from the richer grazing lands. Asa saw him coming from a mile off, a plume of dust rising from a strong, well-fed horse. Asa put down the axe he was using to split wood and waited by the porch, his rifle leaning, as always, within reach. The rider was Calvin Mayfield. He was a man who had inherited what Asa was trying to build. Mayfield was loud, his face fleshy and red, his saddle trimmed with silver. He ran 500 head of cattle and thought it gave him dominion over all he surveyed. "Asa!" Mayfield boomed, pulling his horse to a halt in a spray of gravel. He did not dismount. "Heard you survived the duster. Colder than a witch's heart out here, ain't it?" "Calvin," Asa said, his voice flat. It was not a greeting. Mayfield's eyes slid past Asa. Landing on the garden, Lorena had frozen, her back to him, the hoe in her hands. She was wearing one of Asa's old chambray shirts, the sleeves rolled up, and a pair of men's denim trousers, cinched tight with a bit of rope. Mayfield's thick lips spread into a knowing, ugly grin. Well, it's true. Then, heard you went to the charity auction and bought yourself a present." Asa's body went still. "I've got a mending to do. Calvin, state your business." "Business?" Mayfield laughed, a short, barking sound. "This is pure pleasure. Old friend. I was in town. Heard the story. $50. I'd have paid that for a prime bull, maybe, but for a piece of used, beat up. Well, I suppose a lonely man takes what he can get." Lorena's shoulders hitched. She did not turn. "She's not for sale." "Calvin," Asa said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "Not for sale," Mayfield roared with laughter. "Son, she was for sale. That's the point. That's how you got her. Mayor Hemlock said she was from a fancy house back east. Tell me, Asa, is she worth the price? Does she have any tricks the rest of us should know about? Get off my land." "Or what?" Mayfield leaned forward, his grin turning into a sneer. "Or you'll what, McKinnon? You're a broke-down rancher with a dozen starving cows and a $50 whore. You're the talk of Socorro. They're saying you've finally gone soft in the head." The word hit Lorena like a physical blow. Whore. She dropped the hoe. She turned and walked. Not running. Her head high, her back straight. She walked past Mayfield's horse, past the porch, past Asa. She did not look at either of them. She walked into the house, into her small room. Asa heard the iron bolt slide home. He turned his gaze back to Mayfield. The quiet in Asa's eyes was more terrible than any shout. "You've got 10 seconds, Asa said. "Before I forget my Christian raising." Mayfield's bravado faltered. He saw the look in Asa's face, the look of a man who had nothing left to lose and was suddenly considering the high cost of a single bullet. "No need to get prickly," Mayfield muttered, pulling his horse's head around. "Just being neighborly, but don't say I didn't warn you. That kind of trash, it sticks to a man." He kicked his horse into a canter and rode away. Asa did not move for a long time. He listened to the sound of the retreating hoofbeats, and then to the terrible, profound silence from the house. He had not defended her. He had defended his land. He had not denied the accusation. He had just thrown the man out. He walked to her door. He raised his hand to knock, but he stopped. What could he say? Is he wrong? It didn't matter. The poison was out. He heard a sound from the barn. He turned. A horse, his young, flighty mare, was being let out. Lorena was on its back. She hadn't bothered with a saddle, just a blanket. She had the bridle on, her hands fumbling with the reins. "Lorena!" he shouted, breaking into a run. She looked at him, her face a mask of white, desperate shame. She kicked the mare's flanks. The horse, startled, bolted, not toward the road, but toward the rugged, broken hills to the north. "Damn it!" Asa cursed. He ran to the corral, threw the saddle on Judas, his fingers working the buckles with frantic speed. He was mounted and riding in under a minute, but she had a lead. He followed the fresh tracks, pushing Judas hard. She was riding with no sense, just blind panic, straight into the arroyos and canyons. The sky, which had been a clear, cold blue, was darkening again. The wind was picking up, and it was the same cold, wet wind from before. Another storm was coming. He pushed Judas faster, the horse's lungs starting to burn. He topped a rise and saw her. Maybe a mile ahead, she was in the wash, the wide, sandy riverbed that snaked down from the mountains. It was the last place anyone should be in a storm. "Lorena!" he roared, but his voice was stolen by the wind. The first drops of rain began to fall. They were not drops. They were icy pellets that struck his face and hands. Within minutes, the sky opened. It was a biblical deluge, a solid wall of water that turned the world to a gray, roaring blur. The hard-baked land could not absorb it. The water sheeted off the rocks, turning the red dirt into a slick, treacherous mud. Asa squinted, wiping the water from his eyes. He saw her ahead. The mare was panicking, slipping in the mud, fighting the bit. The bottom of the arroyo was no longer sand. It was a dark, shallow ribbon of water. "Get to high ground!" he screamed. She heard him then. She looked back, her face a pale smudge in the downpour. She tried to steer the mare up the slick embankment, but the horse scrambled, lost its footing, and slid back. And then Asa heard it, a low, deep rumble, like distant thunder. But it was not coming from the sky. It was coming from up the canyon. A flash flood. "Lorena, move!" he bellowed. A wall of brown, churning water, 6 feet high, appeared around the bend. It was moving faster than a galloping horse, a terrible roaring mouth filled with mud, uprooted trees, and debris. Lorena saw it. She screamed, a high, thin sound of pure terror. She yanked the mare's head, but the horse reared, its eyes white. Asa had no time. He spurred Judas, launching his horse down the embankment, sliding on his haunches. He reached the bottom just as the water hit them. The mare was lifted, screaming. Asa drove Judas alongside, leaned out of his saddle, and grabbed the front of Lorena's shirt, his fingers tangling in the fabric. "Let go of the horse!" he yelled. She was frozen. He hit her hand, breaking her grip on the reins. With a surge of strength he did not know he possessed, he pulled her bodily from the mare's back, dragging her across his own saddle, half on, half off. "Hold on!" he roared. He wheeled Judas, pointing the big horse at the embankment. "Go! Go!" The water was at Judas's chest, pulling at them, the current trying to drag them down. The mare was gone, swept away in the torrent, its terrible, high-pitched screaming cut short. Judas lunged, digging his hooves into the collapsing mud, scrambling for purchase. For one terrifying second, Asa thought they were going under. Then the horse found solid rock and surged upward, pulling them free of the flash flood just as the main crest roared past, a solid wall of death. They collapsed on the high bank, Asa falling from the saddle, pulling Lorena with him. They lay in the mud, soaked to the bone, gasping for air, the freezing rain still lashing down on them. Asa pushed himself up. His leg ached. He looked at Lorena. She was on her hands and knees, vomiting, her body shaking so violently he thought she might break apart. "We have to move," he said, his voice raw. He pulled her to her feet. She was limp, a dead weight. "We have to find cover." He tied Judas to a scrub pine, the horse's sides heaving. He grabbed her arm and pulled her, stumbling along the canyon rim. He knew this land. He knew its secrets. 50 yards ahead, there was a shallow alcove, a wide, rocky overhang where the ancient people had once sheltered. He pushed her inside. It was not deep, maybe 8 feet, but it was dry. The wind howled past the opening, but inside, it was still. They were out of the rain. They collapsed against the back wall, the sandstone cold and gritty at their backs. For a long time, the only sound was their own ragged breathing and the roar of the floodwater in the canyon below. They were soaked. The temperature was dropping fast. The cold began to set in, a deep, penetrating chill that went straight to the bone. Asa began to shiver. Then Lorena. Their teeth chattered. We need a fire," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Can't," Asa said, his own words slurring with cold. "Wood soaked? Everything soaked." They huddled, two separate, miserable heaps, trying to conserve their own warmth. But it was not enough. The cold was a living thing, creeping into their muscles, their joints. Lorena looked at him. In the gray, dim light, his face was pale, his lips turning blue. His wet hair was plastered to his skull. He looked older, more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. He was shivering, but he was trying to hide it. She began to sob. It was not the angry, humiliated weeping from the house. It was a low, hopeless, broken sound. It was the sound of a soul that had given up. He was right, she choked, the words torn from her. He was right. That's all I am. A whore. That's all I've ever been. Trash. Lorena, stop, Asa said, his voice chattering. No, she cried, her voice cracking. You don't understand. You don't know. You think you saved someone. You saved nothing. She was crying so hard she could barely breathe. The cold and the terror and the shame had broken the last wall. I had a baby, she whispered. The confession ripped from the deepest part of her. I was 15. My father, a man he owed money to, he let him, and I had a baby. Asa stared at her, his own cold forgotten. It was a boy. He was born still. Blue. He never cried. They took him away before I could hold him. She was rocking now, just as she had during the thunderstorm. No one has ever wanted me. Not for love, not for me. They just used me. My father used me. He sold me. That man at the auction, he used me. And you. She looked at him, her eyes a raw, bottomless pit of pain. You bought me, and now your horse is dead. All because of me. Because I'm poisoned. I'm trash. She bowed her head and wept, her body consumed by the kind of grief that has no end. Asa was shivering, his body numb, his heart a cold, heavy stone. He had no words. There were no words for a pain like that. He was right. You saved nothing. He looked at her, this broken, shivering girl who thought she was worthless. He saw the bruise on her face, the memory of her father's fists, the stillborn baby, and he felt that quiet, dead thing in his own chest break open. He moved. He slid across the gritty sand and pulled her against him. She was stiff, resistant. Stop fighting me, he rasped, his voice thick. He pulled her tight against his chest, wrapping his arms around her shaking body. She was so cold. He pulled his own wet jacket open and tucked her inside it, her face against his shirt, skin to wet cloth. She stopped fighting and just collapsed. She put her hands on his chest and cried, her tears soaking his shirt. Asa held her. He held her tight, his chin resting on the top of her head. He was shivering, she was shivering, but where their bodies touched, a tiny, desperate spark of warmth was being born. He didn't speak. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell her she was wrong. He just held her. He held her as if she was the last living thing on earth. He held her through the long, cold, terrible night, his arms a shield against the storm, against her past, against the world that had tried to destroy her. He held her, and he did not let go. When dawn came, it was to a world washed clean. The rain had stopped. The roar of the flood had subsided to a muddy gurgle. The sky was a pale, fragile blue. They were still holding each other, stiff, sore, and cold, but alive. Lorena stirred first. She was not crying. She was just quiet. She was tucked against him, her ear over his heart. She could feel its slow, steady beat. For the first time in her entire life, she had made it through the night and felt safe. She pulled back, her movements slow. She looked up at him. His face was rough with stubble, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He looked at her. He saw her, truly saw her, past the bruises and the dirt. He raised one hand, his fingers still stiff with cold. He cupped her cheek, his calloused thumb brushing the mud from her skin. He said nothing. He just looked at her, and in his eyes, she did not see pity. She did not see disgust. She did not see desire. She saw understanding. He helped her to her feet. They were both unsteady. We should go, he said. his voice a low gravel. "It's a long walk." He went to Judas, who was standing, miserable but alive, by the pine tree. He checked the horse for injuries, his hands gentle. The walk home took hours. The land was a ruin of mud and washed-out gullies. They did not speak of the night before. They did not speak at all. When they came to a steep, slick ravine, Asa went first, then turned and offered her his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers. Warm and strong, he helped her down, and he did not let go. They walked the remaining miles hand in hand. It was not a lover's grip. It was the grip of two survivors, two people who had seen the bottom and were pulling each other out. When they reached the ranch, the world felt different. The air was warmer. The sun was out. The land smelled of wet sage and clean earth. Asa led Judas to the barn. Lorena went into the house. She stripped off the muddy, ruined clothes. She washed, scrubbing the grime from her skin. She found a pair of his denim trousers and another shirt, and put them on. They felt less like a costume now. She went to the kitchen. She found the flour, the lard, the salt. She began to knead dough for biscuits. And as she worked, a low, hesitant sound came from her throat. She was humming. Asa came in, his face and hands washed. He stopped in the doorway, listening. He watched her hands working the dough. He watched the way the light from the window caught the clean, pale strands of her hair. He lingered, a tightness in his chest. I'll check the cistern," he said, his voice rough. He left, but he was slow to go. The townsfolk, however, were not so forgiving. When Asa rode into Socorro 2 days later for supplies, the whispers were no longer whispers. They were open talk. Men at the saloon stopped talking when he entered. Women at the general store gathered their skirts and moved to the other side of the aisle. Father Gabriel found him as he was loading a sack of flour onto Judas. "Mr. McKinnon, a word." The priest was a young man, barely 30, his face tight with the conviction of his own righteousness. Asa nodded. "Father, I have been hearing disturbing reports, my son, that the woman from the auction, that she remains at your ranch." "She does," Asa said. "This is unwise," the priest said, clasping his hands. "It is an invitation to sin. You are a good man. Asa, a man who has known grief, but you are giving comfort to a woman of ill repute. You are endangering your own immortal soul, and you are not helping hers. The town is talking. They see this as a flaunting of decency. Send her away, for her own good, and for yours." Asa finished tying the sack to his saddle. He stood for a long moment, looking not at the priest, but at the muddy street. He thought of Lorena in the storm. He thought of her small, stillborn son. He thought of her hand in his. He turned to the priest. His face was calm, his eyes as cold and gray as the mountains. "Good day, Father," he said. He did not argue. He did not explain. He bought his flour, his beans, and, on an impulse, a small paper bag of peppermint candies. He rode home. That night, Lorena was in her room, mending the shirt she had worn. The lantern cast a warm, yellow glow. Asa knocked on her open door. She looked up. He did not say anything. He just stood there for a moment, then walked in. He went to the porch, picked up the old, splintered wooden chair that had been his only companion for 6 years, and brought it inside. He set it near the hearth, in the main room. He closed the front door. The sound of the latch clicking into place was final. He had closed his door on the town, on the whispers, on the judgment. He turned to her and held out the small paper bag. "What is it?" she asked. "Peppermints," he said. She stared at the bag, then at him. Slowly, she reached out and took it. Her fingers brushed his. This time, he did not pull away. The peppermints were a silent treaty. Lorena kept them in the small paper bag on the stool by her cot, and she would take one out after supper, rolling the sharp, sweet candy in her mouth. It was a small, childish comfort, and it felt like a luxury beyond measure. Asa had put his chair in the main room, and after the long days of work, he would sit by the hearth, mending tack or just staring into the flames. Lorena no longer bolted her door. She would sit on the floor, on the other side of the fire, mending his shirts, her stitches small and even. The silence between them was no longer a weapon. It was a space they shared, filled with the small sounds of living, the snap of the fire, the pop of a log, the whisper of her needle through denim, the scrape of his knife on leather. He had begun to talk, in small, clipped sentences. Not about his past, not about her, but about the land. He told her how to read the clouds, how to tell a hawk's cry from an eagle's. He showed her the patch of wild mint growing by the well, and she had crushed the leaves, the sharp, clean smell. A sudden, fierce joy. She, in turn, began to fill the house with a different kind of life. She scoured the blackened pots until they shone. She found wild rosemary and hung it from the rafters to dry. She was a good cook, better than he was. And the house began to smell of biscuits and rabbit stew instead of just dust and old grief. He found himself watching her. He watched the way her hair, now clean and brushed, caught the lantern light, a pale, soft gold. He watched her hands, no longer raw, but calloused and capable. He watched the way she smiled, a small, hesitant lifting of one corner of her mouth, when the old, three-legged stray cat he'd never been able to tame came and rubbed against her leg. He was terrified of this feeling. It felt like a thawing, and he had been frozen for 6 years. He was not sure he could survive the thaw. The fragile peace lasted almost 2 weeks. Then, the land, which had given them a moment of grace, turned on them. It was late afternoon. A hot, dry wind had been blowing all day, the kind of wind that frayed a man's nerves and pulled the last of the moisture from the ground. Asa was on the roof of the barn. Replacing shingles, the duster had ripped away. Lorena was in the garden, tying up the young tomato plants that were, against all odds, beginning to thrive. The first sign was the smell, acrid, sharp, and wrong. Then, the horses. Judas and the new mare he'd bought in town, a dun-colored, sturdy creature, began to scream. It was not nice. It was a high, thin sound of panic. Asa stood up on the roof. His heart stopped. To the south, in his back pasture, a plume of greasy, black smoke was rising against the pale blue sky. But it was not just rising. It was moving. The wind was driving it, fanning it wide. A line of bright, hungry orange licked at the base of the smoke. His pasture, his dry, drought-cured pasture. "Lorena!" he roared, sliding, not climbing, from the roof. He landed hard, his knees buckling, but he was running. "Fire! Get to the house! Get the water buckets!" He ran to the barn, grabbed the shovel and the axe. He could already feel the heat, hear the terrible crackling roar. Lorena saw it. She dropped the garden twine and ran. She did not run to the house. She ran to the barn, right behind him. "Go to the house!" he bellowed at her, his face a mask of fury and fear. "Get the canvas, wet it!" "The house! The horses!" she screamed back, pointing. Judas and the mare were in the corral, which was attached to the barn. They were rearing, slamming themselves against the wooden fences as the roar of the fire grew. Embers, carried on the wind, were already landing on the barn roof. "I'll get them," he yelled. "You save the house!" He ran to the corral gate, but the wind was a solid wall of heat. The fire was moving faster than a man could run. It was no longer a line. It was a racing 30-foot wall of flame. It hit the dry scrub at the edge of the corral, and the brush exploded as if it had been doused in oil. "Isa!" He was already inside, dodging the horses' panicked hooves. He unlatched the gate, slapped the animals' rumps. "Go! Get it!" They bolted, Judas in the lead, running north, away from the inferno. Asa turned back, the shovel in his hand. He had to try. He had to make a stand at the barn. He glanced at the barn, and he froze. Lorena was not at the house. She was inside the barn. "Lorena!" he screamed, his voice cracking with a terror far colder than the fire was hot. "The colt!" she shrieked from the dim, smoky interior. He had forgotten. The new mare had a foal, a leggy, week-old colt, still too young and shaky to be out in the main corral. It was in the back stall. "Get out!" he roared, running toward the open barn door. A wave of superheated air and thick, black smoke poured out, hitting him in the face and forcing him back. "I can't! It's trapped!" He put his arm over his face and plunged in. The barn was an inferno. The hay in the loft was ablaze, raining fire down onto the floor. He could barely see, his lungs instantly seizing. He saw her. She was in the back, wrestling with the wooden latch of the stall. It was swollen from the heat, and it was stuck. The colt was screaming, a high, piercing, human-like sound, as it kicked the stall walls. "Leave it!" Asa yelled, grabbing her arm. "We have to go!" "No!" she cried, her face streaked with soot, her eyes wide and wild. I won't let it die!" She was coughing, choking, but she would not let go of the latch. She was pulling at it with all her strength, her hands raw. Asa understood. She was not just saving a horse, she was saving the baby, the one she had never held. He shoved her aside, put his boot to the latch, and kicked. The wood splintered, but it held. He kicked again, a desperate, lunging kick. The door burst open. The colt, wild with terror, bolted, not for the exit, but for the back of the stall. "We can't," Asa gasped, his lungs on fire. He grabbed Lorena again. "No!" She tore from his grasp, picked up a horse blanket from a rail, and threw it over the small horse's head, blinding it. She grabbed its mane. "Pull! Asa, pull!" Asa seized the colt's neck, and together they dragged the shrieking, fighting animal through the stall door, into the main aisle. The roof was collapsing. A burning rafter crashed to the floor a yard in front of them, sending a volcano of sparks and smoke into the air. "Now!" he yelled. He slung his arm around Lorena's waist, half carrying her, and with his other hand, he dragged the colt. They burst out of the barn door, falling, tumbling into the dirt, just as the main beam gave way and the entire roof collapsed inward with a deafening roar. They lay on the ground, choking, sobbing for air. Asa's shirt was smoldering. He beat at it with his hands. The side of his face and his entire left forearm were scorched, a bright, angry red. He looked at Lorena. She was alive. He looked at the colt, which was trembling but standing. He looked at his barn. It was a funeral pyre. He pushed himself to his feet. The pasture was gone. A sea of black, smoking ash. The wind was still howling, carrying the fire south, toward the open desert. He was ruined. He was shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so profound it made him dizzy. He walked, his legs stiff, to the edge of the pasture, where the fire had begun. The ground was still hot, but the evidence was clear. A pile of oil-soaked rags, the broken neck of a whiskey bottle. This was not lightning. This was not an accident. "Calvin," he whispered, the name a curse on his tongue. Calvin Mayfield. Or someone just like him. Someone from the town. Someone who hated him for taking in the trash. He stood there, a lone, scorched figure against a backdrop of black ruin, and he let the hatred burn. It was a cold fire, colder than the one that had just taken his livelihood. That night, the house was the only thing left. The air was thick with the stink of smoke and ash. They sat at the small kitchen table. Asa's left arm and the side of his face were slathered in lard. The only salve he had, the skin was blistering, an agony of weeping plasma. Lorena had not said a word. She had washed her face, her hands trembling. Now she just sat, staring at her own hands, which were blistered and raw from the latch. "You're free to leave," Asa said, his voice a low, rough rasp. She looked up. Her eyes were hollowed out by what she had seen, by what she had done. "You're free," he repeated, his voice harsh. He was staring at the wall, at the place his rifle had been. "There's nothing here. The hay is gone. The pasture is gone. I'll be lucky to have 2 cows left by winter. There's nothing to keep you. I've got $20 left in the tin. You can take it. You can go to Santa Fe. You can start over." He was offering her the out. He was giving her the choice he hadn't had. "Is that what you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He turned his head. The movement pulled at the burned skin on his neck, and he winced. He looked at her. He looked at her soot-stained face, her raw hands, the defiance in her eyes. She had faced fire. She had refused to run. "No," he said, the word torn from his gut. "That is not what I want." He stood up, his chair scraping on the floor. He walked to her. He stood over her, a large, scorched, broken man. "But if you stay," he said, his voice dropping, "if you choose to stay, you have to know, it's not the cot. I don't want you in that room." She stared up at him, her breath caught in her throat. "I want you beside me," he said. "For real. I want to wake up and see you. I want to sit at this table and know you're not going to bolt. I want—" He stopped. The words were too hard. "Mayfield did this," he said, his voice flat. "Or someone like him. Because of me. Because of you. If you stay, it won't be easy. They won't leave us be." "I know," she whispered. "So I'm asking," he said. "Will you go, or will you stay?" She looked at his burned hand, the skin red and weeping. She thought of him kicking open that stall. She thought of him holding her in the cave. She thought of him pulling her from the flood. She stood up. She was close to him now, her head barely reaching his shoulder. She raised her own raw, blistered hand. She did not touch his face. She touched the unburned side of his neck, her fingers hesitant, light as a moth's wing. "I'll stay," she said. His good hand, his right hand, came up. He tangled it in her hair. His grip tight, almost painful. He looked down at her, his gray eyes burning with a fire hotter than the one that had taken his pasture. He lowered his head. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of smoke and ash, of desperation and relief. It was a kiss that tasted of peppermints and fear. It was the kiss of a man who had been dead for 6 years and had just been dragged back to life. He kissed her with a hunger that was terrifying, a need that was bottomless. She kissed him back. She clutched the front of his signed shirt, her hands fisting in the fabric. She met his hunger with her own. She was kissing the first man who had ever treated her as more than an object. She was kissing the man who had seen her broken and had not turned away. It was a long, aching, trembling kiss. They were both shaking, their bodies vibrating with the force of what was happening. He broke away, his breath a raw gasp. He rested his forehead against hers. His eyes were closed. "Lorena," he whispered, the name in prayer. A curse. His hand slid from her hair, down her back, pulling her flush against him. He could feel every line of her, thin and strong. He bent to kiss her again, but she turned her head, just slightly. Her face was buried in his chest. "Asa," she whispered, her voice muffled. I can't. Not yet." He went rigid. The men from her past. Her father. The man who had given her the baby. He had almost become one of them. The shame was immediate. A cold dousing. He released her, stepping back so fast he almost stumbled. I'm sorry," he stammered, his good hand raised, as if to ward her off. I wouldn't. "I know," she said, and she was not afraid. She looked at him, and her eyes were not hollow. They were clear. "I know you wouldn't. It's not you. It's me. I'm not ready." He stared at her. He saw the trust in her face. She was not rejecting him. She was asking for time. He nodded, his throat thick. He took a long, shuddering breath, getting his body back under control. He, Asa McKinnon, who had not wanted to feel, was now consumed by it. "All right," he said, his voice hoarse. "All right." He respected it. A week passed, a week of this new, impossible tension. He had moved her cot into the main room, near the hearth. He still slept on the porch, but now they were in the same room. He would lie awake, listening to her breathe. She would lie awake, listening to him shift on his bedroll. They worked. They had to. He began the long, heartbreaking work of cutting his losses, selling off the last of his cattle before they starved. He was saving only 2, Judas and the mare and her colt. The colt was Lorena's. She had named him Cinder. One morning, she was feeding the chickens when she heard the riders. Not 1, 3. They were riding slowly, confident, up the main path to the house. Asa came out of the ruin of the barn, a charred beam in his hand. He saw them. He dropped the beam and walked, fast, to the porch, picking up his rifle. Lorena's heart went cold. These were not ranchers. They were dressed in dark dusters. Despite the heat, they wore low-slung holsters. Their faces were hard, impassive, bounty men. They stopped 20 yards from the porch. The man in the middle, a tall man with a dead eye and a graying mustache, was clearly the leader. "That him?" the leader asked, nodding at Asa. One of the other men squinted. "That's McKinnon." "Mr. McKinnon," the leader called, his voice polite, but with a steel edge. He did not dismount. "We're not here for trouble. We're here on behalf of a Mr. Jebediah Stone, from Tyler, Texas. We're looking for his daughter." Lorena, who had been frozen by the chicken coop, took a step back. "Jebediah Stone, her father." The leader's dead eye slid to her. "Ah, and there she is, Lorena Stone. We've got a writ here from a judge in Texas. Says you ran off with over $300 of your father's property, jewelry and cash." "That's a lie," Lorena cried, her voice thin. "Ma'am, that's for the judge to decide." The leader said, "The writ is legal. It demands your return to Texas to face the charge of theft. Now, we can do this easy, or we can do this hard. But you are coming with us." One of the other men unlooped the rope from his saddle. Asa stepped forward. He did not raise the rifle. He held it at his side, his thumb on the hammer. "You're on private land," Asa said, his voice quiet. "This is a federal matter. Son," the leader said, his patience thinning. "That writ gives us authority. Now, step aside. This ain't your affair." "She's not going," Asa said. The leader sighed. He looked at his men. "Mr. McKinnon, you seem like a reasonable man. You're harboring a fugitive. That's a crime. All this," he waved his hand at the burned pasture, the ruined barn. "This ain't worth dying for. She ain't worth dying for. Get off my land," Asa said. "Last chance." The leader's hand moved, very slowly, toward his holster. Asa raised the rifle. The click of the hammer being pulled back was the loudest sound in New Mexico. "I won't ask again," Asa said. The leader stared at him. He saw the set of Asa's jaws. He saw the absolute lack of fear in his eyes. He saw the burn on his face, a mark of a man who had already walked through fire. The man grunted. "You're a fool. We'll be back. And when we come back, we won't be knocking." He wheeled his horse, and the three men rode away. Not fast, but with a terrible, unhurried certainty. Lorena sank to the ground, her legs giving way. Her past had found her. That night, the house was a fortress. Asa had barred the door, shuttered the window. The rifle was on the table. He knew they were right. They would be back, and they would come with more force. Maybe with the sheriff, maybe with Mayfield. Lorena was sitting on her cot, her head in her hands. She was a dead woman. Asa walked to his corner, to the small, unadorned cedar chest that had belonged to his wife. He had not opened it in 6 years. He lifted the lid. The smell of cedar and memory filled the room. Lorena looked up. He took out a stack of papers, bound in twine, the deed to the land, his discharge papers from the army, his marriage certificate. He set them on the table. He reached back in. He pulled out an old cavalry revolver, heavy and blue-black, wrapped in an oilcloth. He had not touched it since the war. He unwrapped it. He checked the action. The cylinder. It was clean. He found a box of cartridges and, one by one, he began to load the chambers. Lorena stood up and walked to him. He was sitting on his stool, the gun in his lap, his back to her. His shirt was off. He was tending his burn again. She saw his back. It was not just the fresh, red weeping of the burn. His back was a map of old scars, a crisscrossing of white, puckered lines, whip marks. From a Confederate prison camp. She reached out her hand, the one that was not blistered. She did not touch the burn. She touched one of the old, white scars. He flinched, his whole body tensing, but he did not pull away. "I've never known safety," she whispered, her voice thick. "Not for one day." Not until I came here. Asa put the gun on the table. He turned on the stool. He took her hand, the one that was touching his scar. He looked at her, his face illuminated by the single lantern, half in shadow, half in light. He raised her hand to his lips, and he kissed her palm. "Then stay," he said, his voice a raw promise. "Be mine." His words, "Then stay, be mine," settled over them, not as a command, but as a plea, and with that, the war was over. The small, silent war they had waged against each other, against the ghosts in the room, was done. They had chosen. Life began to rebuild, not from the ashes, but in spite of them. Asa, his arm and face healing, his skin a tight, puckered red, began the slow work of clearing the barn. He salvaged what he could. A few tools, the scorched anvil, the heavy chains. He would not be able to rebuild before winter, but he could raise a lean-to for the horses. Lorena turned her full attention to the garden. She had planted seeds before, in the hardened, hopeful earth. Now, she planted them with a fierce, possessive love. This was not just food. It was a stake in the ground. It was her future, her roots. She found the tomato plants, scorched by the heat, and she watered them. She planted new squash, beans, and corn. She worked from sunup to sundown, and her hands, which had been raw, calloused, then raw again, became strong. They worked as a single unit, their movements already learning the rhythms of the other. He would stop his work to haul water for her garden. She would stop hers to bring him coffee and to clean the weeping burn on his arm, her touch now confident and gentle, the tension of desire, which had exploded in that first, desperate kiss, did not vanish. It settled, becoming a low, warm hum beneath every shared glance, every brushed hand. He had moved his bedroll inside, to the other side of the hearth. They slept in the same room, two soldiers resting, the knowledge of the coming battle a tangible thing in the dark. One evening, after a brutal day of hauling and digging, Asa filled the large galvanized tub on the porch. He had built a fire beneath it, and the water was steaming in the cool twilight. His entire body ached. "It's ready," he called. "For you." Lorena came out of the house, wiping her hands on a rag. She looked at the steaming water, then at him. His face was streaked with soot, his good arm trembling with fatigue. "You take it," she said. "Your burn needs hot water." "I'm fine," he said, his voice rough. "You've been in the dirt all day. So have you." She was not arguing. She was stating a fact. She went to him, to the clean rags and the jar of salve. "You sit. Let me help you with your arm first. Then you can wash." He sat on the porch step, and he let her. She knelt before him and gently unwrapped the bandage. The burn was healing, but it was ugly. She cleaned it, her touch so light he barely felt it. He watched her head, the pale gold of her hair in the dusk. He had a sudden, overwhelming urge to touch it, to see if it was as soft as it looked. When she was done, he stood. "Get in," he said. "Asa, we'll share," he said. It was not a suggestion. He stripped off his shirt, his back to her. She saw the map of his past, the old, white whip scars, stark against his sun-darkened skin, and the new, angry red of the burn. He was a man made of old wounds and new ones. He stepped into the tub and sat, the water rising to his chest. He let out a long, pained sigh as the heat soaked into his muscles. He looked at her. She was standing there, her hands clasped in front of her, uncertain. "Lorena," he said, his voice quiet. He held out his good hand. It was not a demand. It was an invitation. This was the barrier. This was the moment she had feared. Not yet. She looked at his hand, scarred and strong. She looked at his eyes, clear and steady in the fading light. He was not asking for her body. He was asking for her trust. She made the choice. Her fingers were clumsy as she unbuttoned the worn denim trousers. She was not graceful. She was trembling. She stepped out of them, and then, her hands shaking. She unbuttoned the chambray shirt. She let it fall to the porch. She stood before him in her thin cotton chemise, her body slender and pale. He did not leer. He did not look at her with hunger. He just watched her face. She took a breath, gathered her courage, and stepped into the tub. Sliding into the water to face him, the water was hot, a shock, but it was welcome. They sat there for a long moment, knees almost touching, the steam rising around them. "You're back," she said, her voice a whisper. "The scars." "Andersonville," he said, just one word. It was enough. She took the rag and the soap. "Turn around." He did. He turned his back to her, a gesture of profound trust. She began to wash him. She scrubbed the soot from his good shoulder. She gently, so gently, washed the skin around the burn. And then her hand moved to the old scars. She traced them, one by one, her fingers learning the story of his pain. He did not flinch. He just breathed. "Now you," he said, his voice thick. He took the rag from her. He turned, and he began to wash her. He washed her shoulders, her arms, her neck. His touch was rough from calluses, but it was hesitant, respectful. He was learning her, too. He was washing away the dust, the garden dirt, the memory of the auction block. The air was raw with intimacy, thicker than the steam. He let the rag fall into the water. He just looked at her. "Hold me," she whispered, and the words were so quiet he almost didn't hear them. "What?" "Hold me," she said, her voice stronger. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But not like that. Just hold me like I'm worth something. Please." His face, all its harsh lines, softened. He opened his arms. She moved from her side of the tub, her knees bumping his, and she settled into his embrace, her side against his chest. She tucked her head under his chin. He held her. At first, his arm was just a gentle weight, his hand resting on her wet shoulder. She was so still. She felt like a bird that might bolt at any sudden sound. He felt her take a single, shuddering breath. And then she relaxed. She sagged against him, her body, for the first time, letting go of all its tension. And as she melted into him, his grip changed. It tightened. He wrapped his arms around her, his good arm and his burned one, and he held her fiercely. He held her as if he could pour his own strength into her, as if he could protect her from every memory, every man, every whispered word. He held her like she was not just something of worth, but the only thing. She did not cry. She just was. She was safe. The sound of riders broke the morning. It was not a sound. It was a vibration. The ground itself seemed to tremble. It was not 3 men. There were many. Asa and Lorena were in the garden, staking the beans. They looked at each other. The peace was gone. "Go inside," he said, his voice flat and cold. "Get the revolver. Bar the door. Asa, do it. Now." She ran. He walked, his stride long and unhurried, to the lean-to. He had left his rifle there. He picked it up. He stood in the yard, in the black shadow of his ruined barn, and he waited. They came over the rise, a small army. Asa counted. 8 riders. At the front were the 3 bounty men, their faces hard. Beside them rode Calvin Mayfield, a wide, triumphant smirk on his face. And next to him, a man Asa had never seen. He was small, with a mean, pinched face and watery eyes. He was dressed in a black suit, wholly out of place, and he looked terrified. Behind them were 3 more men. Hard cases with rifles across their saddles, hired guns. This was not a posse. This was an invasion. They stopped, a wide semicircle, 30 yards from where Asa stood. The house was at his back. McKinnon, the lead bounty hunter, the one with the dead eye, called out, "Your time is up, friend. We came back polite. That was a mistake." "Calvin," Asa said, his voice carrying easily, "you've got no business here." "I'm just a concerned citizen." "Asa," Mayfield sneered, patting his horse's neck. "Seeing that the law is upheld, you're harboring a criminal, a thief, and a runaway, and a dangerous one. At that. Is that true, Daddy?" one of the hired guns asked the small man in the suit. The small man flinched. "It is. She's mine. She's my daughter, Lorena," And she's a thief. She stole from me. She's unnatural. It was her father, Jebediah Stone. She stole nothing, Asa said, his rifle held loosely at his side. That ain't what this says, the bounty leader said. He unrolled a new, impressive-looking document. It had ribbons and a wax seal. This is a writ from a territorial marshal, authorizing us to retrieve the fugitive, Lorena Stone, and transport her to Texas. It's also got a warrant for your arrest, McKinnon, for harboring, and for assault with a deadly weapon. That paper's a forgery, Asa said. It's real enough for us. The leader grinned. We're deputized. You resist, you're resisting the United States government. Now, send the girl out. We'll take her, and we'll just leave you here for the sheriff to clean up. She ain't coming, Asa said. Last chance. McKinnon, don't die for this. One of the hired guns, a young, eager man, raised his rifle. Let's just shoot him, Marcus, and be done with it. Hold on, Marcus, the leader said. Mayfield was enjoying this. You see, Asa, this is what happens. You play with trash. You get dirty. Now, we're going to take her. And then, I'm going to take this land. For damages. For what you cost me. The front door of the house opened. Lorena stepped out onto the porch. She was not wearing her work trousers. She was wearing her old blue silk dress, the one she'd been auctioned in. She had washed it, mended it. It was her armor. Her hair was brushed and tied back. In her hands, held with both arms, was Asa's heavy cavalry revolver. Lorena, get back inside, Asa growled, not taking his eyes off the men. No, she said. Her voice was clear, and it did not shake. She looked at her father. You, Jebediah Stone flinched. Now, you listen to me, girl. You have been nothing but a plague on me since the day you were born. You get down here. You lied, she said, her voice ringing in the clearing. You sold me. You let that man. You're not my father. You're just a monster. That's it, Marcus said, his patience gone. He raised his hand. Take them. The young, eager gunslinger fired. The bullet was not a warning. It was aimed at Asa. It struck the ground by his boot, close enough to sting his ankle with rock chips. Asa didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired. He did not aim for the man. He aimed for Mayfield. The bullet shattered the smug rancher's pommel, sending splinters of wood into his lap. Mayfield shrieked and fell backward off his horse. Then the world exploded. The other gunslingers and the bounty men opened fire. Bullets chewed the adobe wall of the house, splintering the porch rail where Lorena stood. Down, Asa bellowed. He dived behind the stone well, firing as he moved. He was a good shot. He hit the horse of the eager gunslinger. The animal screamed and went down. Pinning the man's leg, Asa levered another round. He had to get to the porch. He was too exposed. He searched for his shot. He leaned out from behind the well. A bullet from Marcus's pistol ricocheted off the stone, sending a fragment of lead into Asa's left shoulder. He cried out, a sharp, barking sound, and staggered. The rifle slipped from his numb fingers. He was hit. He stumbled, falling against the well, his hand pressed to the sudden, blossoming heat in his shoulder. He's hit, one of the men yelled. He's down! The eager gunslinger, his leg now free, stood up from behind his dead horse. He took his time. He raised his rifle, taking a calm, careful aim at Asa's exposed chest. Got you now! You... A shot cracked from the porch. It was not the sharp crack of a rifle. It was the deep, deafening boom of the cavalry revolver. The gunslinger stopped. He looked down at his chest, a look of profound surprise on his face. A dark, ugly stain was spreading over his shirt. He dropped his rifle. He pitched forward into the dust and did not move. A terrible, ringing silence fell over the yard. Everyone stared. Mayfield, on the ground, was white. Jebediah Stone looked like he was going to be sick. Lorena stood on the porch, the heavy revolver still held out in both hands, smoke curling from the barrel. Her face was pale, her arms shaking from the recoil, but she did not lower the gun. Marcus, the bounty leader, stared at his dead man. He looked at Lorena. She was not a whimpering girl. She was a killer. He had been paid to retrieve a girl, not to die in a war against a rancher and his madwoman. This ain't right," he stammered. "This is murder! She murdered him!" Jebediah Stone was screaming. "Murderer! She's a murderer! You all saw it!" Asa, leaning heavily on the well, his face gray with pain, retrieved his rifle with his good hand. He raised it, his aim wobbly. "It's over," Asa grunted, his voice thick with blood. "Take your dead and go." Marcus looked at Asa. He looked at the girl. He looked at his 2 remaining men, who wanted no more of this. He spat in the dust. "This ain't over, McKinnon. Not by a long shot. This is murder. We'll be back. We'll be back with the real law." He and his men dismounted. They grabbed the dead gunslinger, threw him over his horse, and mounted up. They rode away, fast. Jebediah Stone looked at them leaving. Wait for me!" He scrambled onto his horse and fled after them. Only Calvin Mayfield was left. He got to his feet, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You're dead, McKinnon. Both of you, dead!" He ran to his horse and galloped away. Lorena dropped the revolver. Her hands flew to her mouth. She ran from the porch, stumbling, and fell to her knees beside Asa, who had slid to the ground. "Asa, oh God, Asa, you're hit." "It's clean," he gasped, looking at the wound. "Went through, but it's bad." He was bleeding. A lot. She ripped a piece from her silk dress. She packed the wound, front and back. "We have to go. To the doctor." It took her 20 minutes to get him onto Judas's back. He was a dead weight, barely conscious. She mounted the mare, took Cinder's lead rope, and they rode, a desperate, bloody pair, to Socorro. Dr. Miller's office was quiet. He stitched the wound, his face grim. "It's clean. Asa, you'll live, but you were lucky. An inch over, and it would have taken your lung." As he was tying the bandage, Sheriff Brody walked in. He didn't look at Lorena. "Asa, Sheriff, Mayfield and Stone were just here, ranting about murder. A man is dead, a bounty hunter." "It was self-defense. Sheriff," Lorena said, her voice shaking. "They fired first, 8 of them. They came to kill us." Sheriff Brody looked at her, his eyes cold. "That's not what they say. They say they were serving a legal warrant when you and McKinnon opened fire. 8 men against your 2, and a federal writ." "It was forged," Asa said from the table, his voice weak. "That's not for me to say." Brody shrugged. "This is out of my hands. Asa, this is a territorial matter now. A man is dead, a man in a federal posse. This is a Texas business. It's a family business. I can't protect you. I won't. You brought this plague on my town. Asa, now you live with it." The message was brutally clear. They were on their own. They left the doctor's office. Asa was pale, his arm in a sling. The entire town was watching them. Silent, condemning. "Where do we go?" Lorena whispered, her eyes terrified. Her father was out there. Mayfield. The law. Asa looked south, toward Texas. Then he looked north. "We go north," he said. "We are going to Santa Fe. We find a federal judge, someone above these snakes." He pulled himself onto Judas. Lorena mounted the mare. They rode out of town, not looking back. The journey was a nightmare. It was over 200 miles, and they had to stay off the main roads. They were fugitives. Asa's wound festered. He had a near-constant fever for the first week. Lorena became the rancher. She was the hunter, the protector, the nurse. She shot rabbits with the revolver, her hands still shaking every time she fired, but her aim was steady. She found water. She cleaned his wound, forcing down her gorge as she did. She stood watch every night, the gun in her lap, while he shivered in a fever sleep. He was completely at her mercy. He was a child, helpless, and she, who had never cared for anyone, who had never been allowed to, she cared for him with a ferocity that stunned her. On the 10th night, the fever broke. He woke, his mind clear, but he was shivering, the desert night cold. She was lying near him, her back to him, on her own bedroll. "Lorena," he whispered. She was awake instantly, the gun in her hand. What is it? I'm cold. She looked at him, at his pale, shivering form. She moved her bedroll, unrolling it next to his. She lay down beside him, her back to his front, and pulled her blankets over them both. He was still shivering. She turned in the small space, to face him. His eyes were open, watching her in the starlight. "Thank you," he whispered. You saved me. We saved each other," she said. His good hand came up. He touched her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. She was gaunt from the journey, but she had never been more beautiful. He leaned his head forward. She met him halfway. They kissed. It was not the desperate, fiery kiss from the ranch. It was a kiss of salt and dust, of fever and survival. It was slow, deep, and quiet. It was a promise made under a sky full of stars, a stolen, secret moment in a world that wanted them dead. It took them 4 more days to reach Santa Fe. They were a ruin, starving, covered in trail dust, Asa half dead, Lorena looking like a wild thing. But they were alive. They found the federal courthouse, a grand adobe building near the plaza. They were told Judge Elias Thorne would not see them. They sat on the wooden bench outside his office for 2 days, refusing to leave. On the 3rd day, the door opened. "The judge will see you. 5 minutes." Judge Thorne was an old man with eyes like chips of ice. He looked at them over his spectacles. "I'm a busy man. I have read the charge from Texas. I have read the new charge of murder. Why are you here?" Asa, his arm in its dirty sling, tried to speak, but Lorena stepped forward. "Sir, I'm Lorena Stone, and it's all lies. Ma'am, that is what they all say. Let me tell you," she said. And she did. She told him everything. Her voice was low, and it did not falter. She told him about her father, about the auction in Socorro, about the stillborn baby she never got to hold, about the beatings. She told him about the fire, about Mayfield, about the 8 men who came to their ranch. She told him about the man she shot, the man who was about to murder Asa. She spoke for 10 minutes. She laid her entire life, every ugly, broken piece, on his desk. When she was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Asa watched the judge. The old man's face was stone. Judge Thorne picked up the Texas writ, the one claiming her as property. "Miss Stone," he said, his voice a dry rustle, "your father claims you are his indentured asset. This is New Mexico territory, not the Dark Ages. This is a federal court." He looked at the writ, then at her. "The 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States abolished slavery and involuntary servitude. A father does not own his daughter. He does not have the right to auction her. He does not have the right to sell her. This writ is not only a forgery, it is an offense to God and this nation." He took a large, heavy stamp and slammed it down on the paper. "Annulled." "As for the charge of murder," he continued, his cold eyes moving to Asa, then back to her, "the act of defending your home and your life against a band of armed men, led by a man who had already burned your property and who were operating under a false and illegal warrant. I do not call that murder, Miss Stone. I call that self-defense." He took another stamp. "Dismissed." Lorena looked at the papers. She looked at the judge. Her knees gave out. She would have fallen, but Asa caught her with his good arm. She buried her face in his chest and, for the first time since she was a child, she wept. She wept in relief. They walked out into the bright Santa Fe sun. They were free. Asa sat on the steps of the courthouse, pulling her down beside him. He was exhausted, but he was smiling. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a rolled-up document. It was the deed to his land. He also pulled out a small ink pot and a pen he had bought. He spread the deed on his knee. He began to write, his hand slow and careful. When he was done, he handed it to her. She read it, her eyes blurry with tears. He had, in careful, legal language, deeded 1/2 of his ranch, 160 acres, with full water rights, to Lorena Stone. "Asa," she whispered, her voice choking. "What is this?" "It's yours," he said, his voice quiet. "It's your land. No one can ever take you from it. Not your father, not Mayfield, not me. He looked at her, his gray eyes soft. You're your own woman. Lorena, now you just need a place to do it. She looked at the paper, her name, written in his hand. He had not just saved her life, he had given her one. The ride back from Santa Fe was a different kind of journey. They were not fugitives. They were not prey. But they were not yet whole. They were two broken pieces, held together by sheer will and a shared, desperate hope. Asa's wound was clean, but it ached with a deep, bone-weary throb. He rode with his left arm bound tightly to his chest, his face pale and drawn. Lorena, riding beside him, held the reins of both horses, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The judge's paper, the one that said she was free, was tucked deep in her shirt, a warm, stiff square against her skin. They bought supplies in Santa Fe, flour, beans, salt, and cartridges. They had just enough money left for a single night in a real boarding house. They took a room with 2 small beds, but when the dark came, Asa, his mind still touched by the memory of the fever, began to shiver. He dreamed not of the firefight, but of Andersonville, of the cold and the hunger. Lorena, hearing his low moan, rose from her cot. She did not light the lamp. She went to his bed and, without a word, she lay down beside him, on top of the covers. She put her arms around him, her small, strong body a barrier against the night. He did not wake, but his shivering quieted. He turned in his sleep, his good arm finding her, pulling her close. They slept like that, 2 exhausted children, fully clothed, finding warmth in a world that had offered them none. They rode south, back toward the land that had nearly killed them, back to the ruined barn and the whispers of a town that hated them. We could sell it, Lorena said one night, as they camped by a small, sluggish creek. The deed, we could go west, California. Asa was staring into the fire, his good hand turning a piece of rabbit on a stick. Go west, he said, his voice a low rasp. And what, run from Mayfield? Run from your father. He'll just send more men. There ain't enough west to hide from men like that. No, we're not running. He looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting the fire. It's our land. The judge said so. You don't run from your own land. She nodded. She knew the answer. She just needed to hear him say it. When they reached the high mesa overlooking Socorro, they paused. The town was spread out below, a collection of small, wary buildings. We go around, Asa said. We don't need anything from them. We need grain, Lorena said quietly. Cinder and the mare. They won't make it without feed. The pasture is gone. Asa's jaw tightened. She was right. He turned Judas's head toward the town. They rode down the main street at noon. The silence was absolute. It was as if a plague had struck. The blacksmith, hammering a shoe, stopped, his hammer held in midair. Women on the boardwalk gathered their skirts and hurried inside, pulling their children with them. Men outside the saloon just stared. Their faces were not angry. They were cold, impassive, and shuddered. They were watching the man who had brought war to their town, and the whore he had brought it for. Asa did not look at them. He kept his eyes forward. Lorena, her back straight, her chin high, stared at the space between her mare's ears. She would not give them the satisfaction of her fear. Asa stopped at the general store. He dismounted, his movements stiff and pained. Wait here. He walked inside. The proprietor, Mr. Hanley, was behind the counter. He stopped polishing a glass. Asa. Hanley, I need 2 sacks of grain and a bag of flour. Hanley looked past him, out the window, at Lorena. I don't know how I can serve you. Asa, why not? My money's good. It's not the money, Hanley said, putting the glass down. He looked miserable. Calvin Mayfield. He holds the note in this store. He holds the note on half the businesses in this town. He's made it plain. Anyone who trades with you, he'll call their notes. All of them. He'll ruin me. Asa, he'll ruin this town. So that's it, Asa said, his voice flat. He burns my barn. And you all just let him. We ain't letting him, Hanley whispered, his eyes darting to the door. We're just surviving. Same as you. I'm sorry. I can't sell you the grain. Asa looked at the man, at his fear. He felt a deep, weary pity. He turned and walked out. He mounted Judas. Lorena looked at his face and knew. They were blockaded, starved out. They rode out of town, the same terrible silence following them. They had a home, but they were exiles in their own land. As they reached the small rise that led to the ranch, the sky, which had been a brassy, hateful blue, began to change. The clouds that gathered were not the false, wispy clouds of the dust storms. They were low, heavy, and bruised. They were the color of lead, and as they rode into the yard, past the black skeletal ribs of the barn, the first drops began to fall. It was not a storm. It was a blessing. A slow, steady, soaking rain. It was the rain they had prayed for, the rain that had never come. It drummed on the adobe roof, turning the ash in the pasture to black mud. It was a cleansing. Asa dismounted and just stood in it. He turned his face to the sky, his eyes closed, and let the cool, clean water wash the trail dust and the stink of the town from his skin. Lorena dismounted and stood beside him. She did not look up. She looked at the garden. The thirsty plants were turning their leaves up, drinking in the sudden, miraculous gift. It's a start, Asa whispered. The rain was the beginning. It was also a prison. For 3 days, the sky opened. The parched land drank and drank. The cistern overflowed, and the small arroyos ran with clean, clear water. And in the house, they were trapped. But this was not the tense, desperate trap of the dust storm. This was healing. Asa's wound, with the rest and the clean rain to wash it, began to heal. The red, angry flesh knitted. The pain subsided to a dull, constant ache, and Lorena tended him. In Santa Fe, they had slept side by side, a wall of exhaustion and clothing between them. Here, in their own home, the pretense was gone. There was only one bed. His bed. The cot was not enough. The first night, she had taken her bedroll and laid it on the floor near the hearth. Asa, lying in his bed, his arm aching, watched her. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'll sleep here. It's warmer." "No," he said. He sat up, his teeth gritted against the pull of his stitches. "Lorena, stop." She paused, her blankets in her hand. "Get in the bed," he said. "Asa, your arm." "Damn my arm." "I'm cold, and I'm tired of being alone. Get in the bed." She looked at him, at his eyes, dark with pain and something else, a profound, stark loneliness that matched her own. She left her bedroll. She walked to the bed. She did not undress. She slipped under the quilt, her back to him. The mattress sagged with her weight. She was 1,000,000 miles away. In the same bed, she felt him lie back, hissing as his shoulder took the weight. For a long time, there was only the sound of the rain. "Lorena," he whispered to her back. "Yes, I'm sorry." She turned, her movement slow. "For what?" "For everything, for what Mayfield did, for what the town is doing. I brought you here. I should have known." "You didn't bring me," she said, her voice fierce in the dark. "You saved me. I chose to stay. I chose to fight. That wasn't you. That was me." He looked at her, a shadow in the dark. I'm glad you stayed." "Me too." He was shivering again, a light, residual tremor from the fever and the cold in his bones. "You're cold," she said. It was a statement. She moved. She closed the small, cold distance between them. She slid against his back, her front to his back, her small body fitting into the curve of his. She put one arm over his good side, her hand resting on his chest. She was a living poultice, a line of warmth against his pain. Asa let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 6 years. He did not move. He did not turn. He just let her. He let her hold him. And in that small, dark room, with the rain drumming on the roof, He fell into the first truly deep, dreamless sleep he had known since his wife died. They slept like that every night. It was not the sleep of lovers. It was the sleep of survivors, of partners. It was an intimacy deeper than passion. It was trust. During the days, they planned. The rain had given them a reprieve, but the town had declared war. "The grain," he said, sitting at the table, while she rebandaged his arm. "We can't buy it, so we have to find it." "Where?" "The high country. There's a box canyon, 10 miles north. The Apache. They used to grow maize there, but the cavalry moved them out. 20 years ago, the wild grasses, they might have reseeded. There might be wild oats, wild barley. 10 miles. Your shoulder. It will have to be you," he said, his voice quiet. He hated the words, hated his weakness. "I can't sit a horse that long, not yet, but you can take the mare. You can take the packs. I can draw you a map." She, who had been afraid of her own shadow. She, who had been a prisoner. Now, she was to be the provider. "Show me the map," she said. She was gone for 2 days. Asa was alone in the house, his rifle by his side. It was the longest 2 days of his life. He was not worried about bounty hunters. He was worried about her. The land was treacherous. A horse could fall. A snake. He was on the porch, pacing, his good arm clenching and unclenching. When he saw her, she was a small speck, riding out of the northern hills. The mare was walking slowly, her head low, the packs were full. Lorena slid from the saddle, her legs stiff. She was covered in mud. "It was there," she said, and her voice was full of a tired, quiet pride. "Just like you said. I filled every sack." Asa did not look at the sacks. He looked at her. He walked to her and, with his good arm, he pulled her into an embrace. He buried his face in her dusty hair. "Don't you ever do that again," he whispered, his voice thick. "We needed the grain," she said, her arms going around his waist. "I don't care," he said. He held her, his heart hammering, the relief so profound it was painful. That night, the wall between them truly fell. They lay in the bed, facing each other. His arm was almost healed. He was no longer the invalid. She was no longer the nurse. They were just a man and a woman. He touched her face, his calloused thumb tracing her lips. She did not pull away. She leaned into his touch. "Lorena," he whispered. He kissed her. It was not the kiss of fire and ash. It was not the kiss of fever and starlight. It was a kiss of homecoming. It was slow and deep, and it held the promise of the rain. When he held her, it was not just with his arms. It was with all the broken, healed-over pieces of his soul. And when she held him back, she was not the girl from the auction. She was the woman who had faced fire, who had taken a life to save him, who had fed them with her own hands. She was his equal, and she was, finally, ready. They came together not as two halves, but as two whole, scarred, and strong individuals, and in the quiet of the small adobe house, they made a new kind of peace. Life, real life, began. Asa's arm healed. The strength returned to his body. Together, they began to rebuild. They could not rebuild the barn. Not yet. But they built a long, solid lean-to for the horses. They dug, they hauled stone, they felled trees. They worked side by side, from sunup to sundown. They spoke little, but they moved as one. He would lift the log, and she would be there with the brace. She would be digging a post hole, and he would be there with the next post. One afternoon, they were clearing rubble from the barn. Lorena found something in the ashes, a small, scorched porcelain doll, its face cracked by the heat. It belonged to his daughter, Alice. Asa took it from her, his hand trembling. He had not thought of his daughter, not really, in years. The grief had been a stone he'd carried, but the sharp edges had been worn smooth. Now, holding the doll, the sharpness returned, just for a moment. Lorena watched him. She did not speak. She just put her hand on his good arm. He closed his hand around the doll. He looked at her. Then he looked past her, to the cottonwood tree on the hill. "Come on," he said. He walked to the tree. She followed. There were two small, simple wooden crosses, weathered by the years. Sarah McKinnon, Alice McKinnon. Asa knelt. He dug a small hole with his hands, at the foot of his daughter's grave. He placed the porcelain doll in it. He covered it. He stayed there, kneeling for a long time. Lorena knelt beside him. She put her hand on the earth. "I had a son," she whispered. I never knew where they put him. I never even got to name him." Asa looked at her. He saw the old, hollow pain in her eyes. He stood. He went and got the shovel. He did not dig near his wife. He did not dig near his daughter. He found a new spot, a few yards away, under a young, flowering mesquite tree that had survived the fire. He dug a small, perfect square. He found a smooth, flat river stone. He brought it back. "What was his name?" he asked. I don't know." "Give him one," Asa said, his voice gentle. She looked at the small, empty grave, a space for the memory she had never been allowed to have. "David," she said. His name was David. Asa took his knife. He spent an hour, patiently, carving the name into the stone. David. Nothing else. Together. They placed the stone at the head of the small patch of land. Lorena laid a sprig of wild rosemary on it. She did not cry. She just looked. She had a place to put her grief, a place to rest. She stood, and Asa put his arm around her. They stood there, the four of them, a family. That evening, they sat on the porch. The world was quiet. The garden was thriving. Cinder, the colt, was chasing a butterfly in the new pasture. The wild grasses already sprouting, green and strong, from the rain-soaked ash. Lorena was leaning her head on Asa's shoulder. His arm was around her. They were dirty, they were tired, and they were, in a way they had never known, happy. "Asa," she said, her voice quiet. That paper, the deed, it says I'm my own woman." "That's right. And the judge's paper, it says I'm free." "You are." She paused. She sat up, turning to look at him. Her face was serious in the twilight. "I don't want to be your partner just on paper, and I don't want to stay here just because you saved me, or because you're good to me." He watched her, his heart suddenly tight. "What are you saying, Lorena?" "I'm saying I'm free to go, and I'm free to stay, and I'm staying. But I want to stay. Proper." She took a deep breath. "Will you make me your wife? Will you marry me?" He stared at her. "Not," she added, her voice fierce. "Not for protection. Not because of what Mayfield will say, or the town. Not for any reason but one." "What reason?" he whispered. "Because you want to." Asa looked at her. He looked at this woman who had survived her father, survived an auction, survived fire and flood and bullets. This woman who had saved his life, his ranch, and his soul. This woman was offering him everything, not because she had to, but because she chose to. His eyes, those gray, steady eyes that had seen so much death, filled with tears. He did not wipe them away. He reached out his good hand, the one that was scarred and calloused, and he cupped her cheek. "Yes," he said, his voice thick and broken. "Yes, I will." The wedding was humble. There was no church. There was no priest. Father Gabriel would not have come, and they would not have asked him. It was just the two of them. The next morning, they washed, they put on their cleanest work clothes, they walked, hand in hand, up the small hill to the cottonwood tree. They stood between the graves of his past and the new, small grave of hers. There was no book. There were no witnesses, save for the land and the sky. Asa spoke, his voice low and clear. "I, Asa McKinnon, take you, Lorena Stone, to be my wife, to be my partner. I have been dead for a long time. And you brought me back. I will stand by you. I will protect you. I will love you, all my days." Lorena's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I, Lorena Stone, take you, Asa McKinnon, to be my husband. I came here with nothing. I was nothing. You showed me what strength was. You showed me what kindness was. You gave me a home. You gave me my life. I will stand by you. I will work for you, and I will love you all my days." He took a small, simple gold band from his pocket. It had been his mother's. He had kept it in the cedar chest. He slid it onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He kissed her, and under the shade of the cottonwood, they were married. Time passed. The lean-to became a barn, new and strong. The garden produced a harvest so rich they had to build a root cellar. Cinder grew into a strong, fine horse. The silence from the town did not break, but it softened. When Asa rode in for supplies, which he now had to pay for with gold, having sold his remaining cattle, Hanley would no longer meet his eye, but he would fill the order. He would leave it on the loading dock. A silent transaction. One day, Lorena was in town. She had ridden in on the mare, her head high. She was buying seeds. The women on the boardwalk still moved aside. They still whispered. But as she came out, one of them, the doctor's wife, a woman who had known Sarah, stopped. She looked at Lorena. She looked at the simple gold band on her hand. She just nodded. A small, curt, almost invisible nod. It was a start. One evening, a month later, Asa was on the porch, cleaning his rifle. Lorena was inside, baking bread. He heard a wagon. He looked up, his hand going to the revolver on his hip. It was Dr. Miller's wagon. But it was his wife, Mrs. Miller, holding the reins. She stopped the wagon at the edge of the yard. She did not get down. She just sat there. "Mr. McKinnon?" she called, her voice stiff. "Ma'am, I was baking," she said. "I made too much." She reached into the back and pulled out a basket. She set it on the ground, a good 10 feet from the wagon. "It's just pie," she said. "Apple." She clucked the reins, and the wagon rattled away. Asa waited until she was gone. He walked to the basket. Inside was a large, perfect, golden-crusted apple pie, still warm. He brought it inside. He set it on the table. Lorena looked at it, then at him. She smiled, a real, full smile that lit up her whole face. The war was over. They had won. That night, they stood on the porch, arms around each other. He was no longer the invalid. She was no longer the captive. They were just a man and a woman, partners. They watched the sun bleed fire across the horizon, setting the high desert bluffs alight. The land was still harsh. It was still unforgiving. It would test them again. There would be drought, storms, and hardship. But they had faced it all, and they were still standing. They had made something lasting. Lorena leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, soap and leather and clean earth. She looked at her hand, at the gold band shining in the last light. She thought of the auction, the fear, the shame. It seemed like a lifetime ago. Another woman's life. She whispered, her voice so quiet it was almost just a breath against his skin. "You didn't pay for me, Asa. You paid so I could be free. Thank you all so much for listening to this story. I truly hope it found a place in your heart. This is a tale of the real West, where life was hard, but love, when it came, was harder still. I'd be honored if you'd let me know where you're listening from. It always does my heart good to know how far these old stories travel. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to From Wild West. We've got a lot more tales to tell. And please, do share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Until next time.